I'm going to present this paper with Songchul Lee, who was a student of mine, and Ralf Lütteke, who is a colleague of mine, who will continue to be so. Yeah, so this paper, by chance, is very correlated with what Mick was talking about yesterday. But it's like a Hank take on some of the same issues as Mick was talking about. It's still a work in progress, so there's still stuff to be done and so on. But where we were coming from, we were thinking about like, so now we're in this cycle where inflation has gone up all over the world, and the Fed has been raising interest rates, and Fed seems to be sort of effective in controlling inflation. So we're going through this monetary cycle now. How is that going to impact on other countries? And in this paper, we'll be thinking about emerging markets, and in particular on Southeast Asia. And so we started looking at South Korea, and we noticed some issues there that made us think a little bit more about this issue here. So there's this stylized fact around that when the US hikes their rates, some of these Southeastern Asian countries, they don't tend to actually follow. And so we were thinking about, like, where might that come from, and what might that say about how the appreciation of the dollar will impact on other economies. So I'll try and convince you, like, some of these issues, when you look at the data, they have some interesting aspects when you think about them in Hank models. In particular, what I'll try and highlight is an imbalance between the structure of foreign assets and foreign liabilities, which gives rise to some valuation effects, but they sort of work differently in the setup I look at than in the setup that Mick looked at. So what we do in the paper is that we try and connect the open economy New Keynesian literature, the valuation effect literature that Mick has worked on, and then the Hank literature. And what comes through the Hank literature is basically two things you can think about immediately. So the first one is asset liquidity is something that matters in these models here. And that's something you see is important when you look at the structure of foreign assets and liabilities. That's the first thing. And secondly, in the Hank papers, they tend to talk about income effects. That's the thing you can get in these models here. It actually turns out that the one thing that's important is a little bit more the structure of portfolios across the wealth distribution, and that will matter for how things will work out. So, okay. So this here is a picture of the net foreign position of South Korea, which is what I'll look at. And when you look at that one, you can see that the net foreign position is kind of small. It's changed a bit over time, but on the net, it's not very different from zero. So that sort of might make you think that foreign assets liability stuff, that actually is not really so important to think about if you think about an economy like South Korea. But then, if you do a split into liquid and illiquid stuff, then you see that there is something going on. So South Korea here, you can see in terms of liquid assets, they hold claims on the rest of the world. And actually, it's not small, it's around 20% of GDP. If you look at illiquid stuff, then instead they are indebted in illiquid stuff. And so if you think about what's the difference between the liquid and illiquid, well, okay, liquidity is one, but the other thing is that there are large return differences between these. So what we'll try and think about, what's the implication of a picture like this here when you think about how shocks impact on economies. So a key observation here is that not only for Korea, but for much of Southeast Asia, the net foreign asset positions tend to be small, but the gross financial positions, they're often large. So large, both assets and liabilities. And they tend to be net creditors in low-return liquid assets and net debtors in high-return illiquid assets. And when you got these like large growth positions and plus this imbalance here, then you potentially get an importance of what are called valuation effects in this literature here. So the simplest example here, and the one Mick has highlighted many times, and other people have highlighted, is that suppose I hold a liquid asset claim on the rest of the world. Then, if the dollar suddenly appreciates on that day, I can get a larger capital gain or capital loss. And then you could think about how is that going to impact on the economy. But here, there's going to be another thing that's going on, and that is that there's a return difference between these assets and liabilities, and that potentially creates some more persistent effect. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write down, and then I'm actually going to estimate using a Bayesian estimator, a small open economy Hank model for South Korea, of which a simplified version we actually gave to the Bank of Korea. So Bank of Korea now have an estimated Hank model that they use for inflation forecast and stuff like that. It's the first central bank in the world, I think, that have it. But they don't have the complicated model I'm showing here. They have like a stripped down version of this. So South Korea, as you probably know, is a very open economy. Export to GDP is around 40%. Its net foreign asset position is approximately 0, but there are large growth positions. And there's an imbalance in the liquidity and returns of foreign assets and liabilities. And they have a flexible nominal exchange rate regime. So we're going to use this to try and think about like the impact of foreign shocks on the Korean economy, and in particular think about inequality, but also the transmission mechanism in this setting here. So South Korea have just the openness. They're kind of sensitive to variations in foreign demand. So one thing that's important here is that when US is coming out of this, you can think like US interest rates are high. So there's an exchange rate effect on South Korea through that. On the other hand, like if then there's also might be an effect through U.S. demand for exports from South Korea, and then there's going to be a third effect in here that's going to be important, and that's going to be also the impact on the U.S. stock market, because that's going to be important for thinking about what's going on in South Korea here. Basically, because South Korea, they have been selling lots of equity to the rest of the world, and particularly to the US. Right, okay. So I'm going to show you some data first, and then I'll build up the model after that. But just to put sort of some intuition for what's going to go on here. So in this model, so if you think about foreign shocks, I'm going to think about liquid bond return foreign shocks, illiquid capital return foreign shocks, and foreign demand. And the liquid bond returns here, they're actually not going to be so important for the domestic economy here, and that's because Korea they hold foreign liquid assets on the net. So whenever there are variations in the liquid bond returns, they sort of have bought themselves some insurance there. That might be exactly the reason why they're holding this stuff. Illiquid capital returns, instead, we find that the economy is going to be quite sensitive to that. And that's, in a way, the direct consumption response to changes in foreign illiquid capital returns, that's not going to be so strong, not because it's not important, but because of who is holding this stuff in the Korean population. So that's sort of held by the right tail of the wealth distribution. The right tail of wealth distribution own the Korean firms, and they are the firms that are indebted to the rest of the world. So the impact on consumption, these guys in the right tail, they can ensure the consumption. So they're not going to be so sensitive, their consumption to this. But it's going to have an important impact. If the US stock market gets stronger, the return on Korean equity has to go up. And that transmits through investment and therefore through wages and stuff in Korea. And that's going to be an important thing. Then there are going to be the export demand shocks here, and the main way they're going to transmit on the Korean economy is going to be through wages. So one result we are finding consistently here is that, and I sort of like that, is that in the times when demand for Korean exports were booming, that held down inequality in Korea. And the main reason for that it was that it was stimulating wages, and the left tail of the wealth distribution is sensitive to wages. Okay. So quick run through. I won't cite anybody apart from Larry, of course, important person, and Mick as well as well in here. Okay. Yeah. So the Hank model for the results we're getting are important for two things. So first of all, potentially for getting income wealth effect out of these valuation effects on consumption. That's the first thing. The second thing, though, is through the structure of who holds these foreign assets and liabilities.
Yeah, I'm confused by the word income valuation effect.
Okay, so
there's income effects on
there's going to be yeah. So in the Hank models, you might have households around with high marginal propensities to consume. And so if foreign asset liabilities move, and that moves their income, that might have a direct impact on consumption. So first, a bit of data, just to motivate the whole thing. So I'm just going to show. I'm going to slice foreign assets and liabilities into liquid and illiquid instruments. And I'm going to use either the Korean flow of funds data. I'm going to use Lane, Milesi, Ferretti data. I can do it a bit better on flow of funds data. But what we call liquid are things like foreign exchange holdings, government bonds, and loans. And the illiquid stuff like FDI, equity, etc. Okay. And this is what it looked like for Thailand and for Malaysia, and it should look similar to what we had seen earlier. So see, Thailand and Malaysia both, like the net position, the green line in the middle is kind of small. And then you look at assets, and they hold claims on the rest of the world, that's the red stuff in both pictures, and they are in-depth in illiquid stuff, that's the blue stuff. Yeah.
The CPS data.
This is from Lane and Milesi Ferretti. Yeah. Yeah.
Just in the previous slide about the data, I was curious. So why are I understand what you're getting at with the, like, for example, equities and investment fund shares. In some sense, they're very liquid, but in another sense, it's just that you may take a hit today and you don't want to sell it. So
no, yeah.
But it's not obvious, right?
Yeah. So
I agree. I was very confused at the beginning, but when they calibrate this model, they use the data in this way.
Okay.
No, so I think the idea is that for Korean, so equities from the point of view of Korean economy, equity may not be liquid. That may be liquid. From the point of view of an individual household, this may be liquid. That's the way you're going to model it. That probably is through indirect holdings, through pension stuff, and so on. Yeah. So that's why we put it there. You can play around with that. So you'll see in a minute what are the main things here, and then one could discuss whether you want to change the modeling a little bit. Yeah. So here the way we think about it is that this sort of, if I think about a household in this economy here, the stuff we put down there is stuff we think about that is less liquid for the household. For a big pension fund, this might be liquid, but for the individual household, it might not be. That's the way. Huh?
Equities are illiquid. I mean, you can
yeah, so you could refine this. So actually, again, on the Korean data, we could refine a bit what we call liquid and not what we call illiquid. Yeah. I mean, so maybe another way of seeing it is a little bit from the return differences. I'll come to in a second. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think these are things one could discuss. Yeah, yeah. So this is all of Southeast Asia, apart from I take out here Japan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, and you can see again it has the same structure. You hold claims on the rest of the world on liquid stuff, and you're indebted in what we call illiquid stuff. So again, yeah, this is South Korea over this sample from 90 to 21. Net liquid to GDP was, and they were in a plus position of 13.5%, and then they were in deficit on the illiquid stuff, 16.5%. if you look at what it is, so I have all the liquid stuff on the left, and I have all the illiquid stuff on the right. So coming back to Larry's question, actually, most of the liquid stuff, that's foreign exchange reserves. So it's really...
That's the illiquid stuff.
The liquid.
Sorry, the liquid. That's central banks.
Yeah, that's basically through the central bank is holding foreign exchange reserves. Yeah. And on the illiquid, what that is most of it is equity. There is also some FDI.
The equities are playing a really important
role. Yeah, the
role.
Equities are playing a big role, yeah.
That's worth thinking about exactly what they are.
So here it's like, if you look at the gross positions too, in terms of liquid assets, so the net position is positive, and basically the liabilities there are very small. So this comes mostly from gross assets. On the illiquid, there the net position is negative, but they hold both assets and liabilities. Yeah, it's just that liability is much larger.
The ones at the top are held the assets.
They are basically held through the central bank. Yeah, most of that.
So they
yeah.
In terms of the people and the Hank, the thing that. In terms of the Hank, I don't think this works, does it?
It's on already.
Yeah, but oh. Okay, I couldn't hear myself. Oh, now I can. Yes, sir. Okay. Yeah. So the liquid assets in your model, you're going to differentiate between government and the private guys, I guess, and then but the private. What matters, I thought, was liquid and illiquid assets of the private guys, and they probably don't have any liquid assets.
So the direct. I mean, okay. So that. In that little, like you think about the Dybke Snyder and so on, and there's always, yeah. So who is eventually the one who is holding that asset? You could call the eventual holder the government, or you could say that it's the household sector that eventually sits on that asset.
It could be to the extent that the government, the central bank, backstops banks,
yeah.
Which in turn helps people out.
Yeah, so this is all stuff one can put into a model of who is the eventual holder of all of this. Yeah. So here so let me show you how the returns look like. And so this in orange are the illiquid returns, and in blue are the liquid. So if you do this for the other East Asian countries, the orange line tends just to be above the blue line all the time, but much higher volatility and higher mean. So the illiquid stuff is higher risk, but also tends to be higher mean. There's a negative bit here. That was because of very bad returns on Korean net foreign directed investment.
That's the crisis.
It's the crisis and some bad investments on FDI. Yeah. But you have on average quite a lot higher return, but also more volatile on the illiquid stuff than on the liquid stuff. Here is so doing a little bit this the direct versus the indirect. So look at the net foreign position of the households. So what I have in the dotted lines are the direct holdings of the Korean households, and that's small. But then if you take into account that Korean households, they own the Korean firms that are indebted, then you get the full line with the total holdings and the illiquid stuff. And again, if you do the same, if you say that households are the eventual claimers to the government sector, then you get on the liquid.
That seems very reasonable. I think the way it might work is that the Korean households put dollar deposits in the banks. Now the banks have to acquire dollar assets.
That's right.
One possible dollar asset is to lend it out to a Korean firm.
Yeah.
But another possibility is to deposit it with the central bank, which then turns around and buys some of some of that liquid stuff.
Yeah.
And that will be a sense in which
you are the eventually.
You said that earlier.
Yeah.
That it corresponds actually to, in some sense, to an asset held by the private.
That's right. Yeah. Okay, not going to say much about this here, but here we divided into the poor, wealthy, the poor and wealthy hand-to-mouth, and the non-hand-to-mouth guys. If a quick message from that is that the guys that are holding this negative position on the illiquid stuff, the eventual owners of that is the right tail of the wealth distribution. That's basically what you see in the data. Okay, so I'm going to write down a model here. And it has one part of it is like completely standard. Mick would write it down like a new Keynesian setting. And then the Hank stuff comes through the household sector and through this liquid versus illiquid assets here. So I'm gonna concentrate more on that.
Is there a way to actually imagine a wealthy hand-to-mouth person? I know I've heard this term a lot, but I find it very surprising. I mean, why can't they get lines? If you're wealthy, can't you get a line of credit against your wealth? Or are you really going to have to eat dog food when you're a billionaire in Seoul?
No. So here, I think the way you would think about this is that, like, so if you wrote it down with adjustment cost, and shocks were big enough, then in a sense the wealthy hand-to-mouth, they are no longer hand-to-mouth. They would adjust then. So you should think we have a shortcut to modeling this, but you should think of that as being valid sort of in a perturbation basis. Yeah.
You need the share to be large enough so that you have meaningful business cycle impact.
I mean, what you do see in the data is that if I look at the US wealth distribution, but also in these countries here, there is quite a lot of households that have positive net wealth, but very low, what I call the liquid assets. Whether they're really hand-to-mouth,
but they have big lines of credit. They don't need to hold. They don't need liquid assets because they have access to instant liquidity at any moment.
So here I can't say anything about that, but I have another paper in which we look at Danish household data, and we actually know all of that stuff. So that does turn out that there are these wealthy hand-to-mouth guys around. So these are typically people that just bought a house. And they did put some of their savings into the house, but they don't actually have any liquid assets, and they don't have credit lines. So there we actually know exactly from the banks whether you do have these credit lines and so on. Okay, so here's gonna be the one. So these households around, period preferences, utility of consumption, disutility of work. They face idiosyncratic earnings risk. So most of these guys are workers, and while they're workers, they face some idiosyncratic earnings risk through some efficiency parameter HI, which is follow a lock autoregressive process while they're workers. Sometimes they hit what Victor calls the awesome state. And when in the awesome state, they manage the firms and they get the profits from firm ownership. But there are very few of those guys. That's just in there to fit the wealth distribution. The right tail are these firm managers. Okay, then those that have labor income, they have some income, and that is taxed at a progressive rate. So there's some social insurance through the fiscal system here. And they are up against the budget constraint, so they spend on consumption, and then they can buy an asset portfolio that's either B is a liquid asset, and then K here is an illiquid asset. And here we take the shortcut that it's like in a Calvaux model that you can adjust that with some probability lambda every period. Then you have your after-tax and transfer income. You get your income on your portfolio. And then if you're a worker, you get also some profits from labor unions. If you own firms, you get profits from firms. Okay. So you think about the assets that these guys have access to now. The liquid versus illiquid. The difference between the two is that the liquid that has a low return, but it's liquid. The illiquid one has a expected higher return, but it's illiquid. So there's liquidity risk on that one. So that's one choice you have. And then you can buy, the way we model this is that you buy into investment funds that are made up of domestic versus foreign assets. And the foreign one, the issue is that you may take on some exchange rate risk. Domestic one is that you're sort of constrained by domestic savings and investment. But we just assume that there are going to be these investment funds around that put together either a liquid or illiquid asset portfolio. So at the household level, fully nonlinear, they choose their portfolios of the liquid versus the illiquid. So that's just done fully non-linear. At the portfolio level, we calibrate the long-run shares of domestic versus foreign in each of these portfolios, and then at each point in time, there is an arbitrage condition that leads to adjustment in the portfolio composition here. So the liquid and portfolio, that's some domestic portfolio share. Then you get the real return on domestic assets, and the same, and then the share on foreign assets there, and the domestic currency real return on that. And the same for the illiquid. And these funds here, they're doing arbitrage. So they're adjusting optimally over time in a sort of risk-neutral way. And then the households are solving fully non-linear how they want to put together their portfolio of these two.
So does that mean you have uncovered interest parity all the time?
Yeah, so there's going to be an interest rate parity condition on both of them. A return parity condition, both on the liquid and the illiquid stuff.
So they both have to have the same return in expected value domestically and with the foreign.
That's right, yeah. But not between the two asset classes. Yeah. So how is this going to work out? So the right tail of the wealth distribution here, they're going to be well insured because they have a lot of wealth. And they're going to hold portfolios with large shares of illiquid assets because these guys are wealthy, so they go for the high return stuff. So they're going to be subject to the illiquid return shocks, but they can smooth them over time. The medium wealth households, they're going to have some insurance through wealth, but they're going to have a lower portfolio share of illiquid assets. So they're going to have a lower returns on average and less able to smooth them. The low wealth households, they're not going to have much wealth here, so they can't really smooth here. And they don't want to hold the illiquid stuff, so they're going to be holding, if they have any savings, it's going to be in liquid stuff. So there's going to be a difference throughout the distribution here in the portfolio composition.
And that's only because it's hard to liquefy this.
That's right, yeah.
And they have a high chance of needing liquidity.
So the low wealth guys, if they get a negative shock, they don't want to sit there with all this illiquid stuff, yeah. Right. So then the rest of the supply side, labor unions, they take all the labor, put it through a CES aggregator, sell it on as monopolistic suppliers of labor. So from that, we get a weight Phillips curve. There's going to be shock in there. Intermediate goods producers, they take capital and labor through a Kapdokos production function, and from them, we get the factor demands. Goods producers, they take the intermediate goods, differentiate them, sell some of it domestically, other abroad. They're monopolistically competitive, sticky prices. Capital producers, they're going to determine the domestic capital price. Retailers, they have an Armington aggregator to take domestic goods, foreign goods, with some elasticity substitution, so they determine domestic imports. Fiscal policy, we assume there's a rule for fiscal spending. So we model this as a monetary dominance regime. So fiscal policy, they reassure that there's fiscal solvency. Monetary policy is a Taylor-type rule. So there's interest rate smoothing in response to domestic inflation of the final good, and to a shortcut to the output gap. VT is a final output through the Armington aggregator.
Morten?
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question? So why is the economy as a whole short on illiquid assets?
Why they are doing...
I mean, we just,
yeah, so that is a question here we don't answer. So we take that for... So we ask that, given that they are, what's the implication of that?
But here all the households, the wealthy households are long illiquid assets. I mean, I didn't see anyone going short, so...
Well, okay, so if that depends on how I write down this portfolio I had here. So I can write this down so that you see that they are actually short on the short on domestic equity. So that's just a question of how I normalize that portfolio, yeah.
And how does that emerge in equilibrium?
Huh?
How does that emerge in equilibrium, that they are short? What are the forces that make them go short?
So do you mean how that is consistent equilibrium? Or yeah. So here, so that what it does is that gives you sort of, you're sending basically payments abroad, and you're paying through net export. That's what. Yeah.
Why is it that it's a choice?
Why is it a choice? I think one way of thinking about it, you could just think maybe Korea is a very good place to invest. Like I sit on an investment fund, we invest a load of money in those economies because they give you a good return. Yeah. So it's import of foreign capital.
Yeah, we can discuss this afterwards. I'm just trying to square with the households. The households are the ultimate holders, if I understood correctly.
So the households are the eventual holders of this because they're the eventual owners of
and some people have no illiquid assets and some people are long illiquid assets. I didn't see anyone going short.
So they are short here. So they are basically short selling Korean equity here. Yeah. So, yeah, I should probably write down this one here so that you see that. But if I normalize this, I can normalize this on domestically hold equity, and then you see that they are short. Yeah.
But that's an imposition on the model that
that's
economy as a whole. I don't. Yeah, I have a problem. I didn't realize this, but I don't really understand how. I mean, if you just squashed everything down to a representative agent model, then how would you impose? You're just basically imposing this portfolio.
Yes, that's right.
Saying,
yeah, just say that's what we are calibrating towards. Yeah.
Okay, right.
What are the parameters?
So if you think about this here, so the way this here is going to work, so it's going to be some return on equity, and that's going to determine the Korean capital stock. And part of that is going to be financed from abroad, part of that is going to be financed from home.
So it's like if you had a small economy representative agent model, you'd just be making it initially a net debtor.
That's right, in the illiquid asset, yeah. I
see.
Okay. Then the current account, so that if you write down like the model consistent definition of the current account here, that has all of these different valuation or return differences in there. So here I've written it down, where I take the liquid asset as I'm sort of basing everything on that. So this would be the standard term you have like in the one asset model. Then return differences between liquid liabilities and assets times the gross position on liquid stuff here. So here you get these short-run capital with gains and losses through that. So this is like when the exchange rate jumps, you get a gain or a loss, but after that there's arbitrage. So that's sort of an impact. Here, returns differences between illiquid assets and the liquid assets, and here on the liability side. And this instead may be much more persistent. So this is like the exchange rate jumps, but there's also a steady state difference in the returns that I'm paying foreigners that are holding my equity versus the return I get on the foreign exchange holdings. So that might be much more persistent. Then we assume domestic currency pricing, so maybe, but it would be very easy for us to do dollar pricing, something like that instead. Okay. So just to sum up, so there's a lot of stuff going on. There's incomplete markets through this idiosyncratic risk and lack of insurance. New gains and features through sticky prices and wages. Open economy through trade in goods and assets. So we're going to put in shocks. There's going to be idiosyncratic income shock, domestic policy shock, technology shock, markups, foreign asset demand, asset returns, and there's a bunch of state variables around. We take you through one of these standard methods for solving these models here. We use a method that was developed in a paper by Ralf and Christian Bayer. And then, so it turns out that this here actually lends itself for estimation because there's a subset of parameters in that solution that impact on the steady state, and there's another subset that either don't impact on the steady state or impact on the steady state sort of in a linear way. And those that don't impact on the steady state or sort of impact in a linear way through the value function, those you can estimate because you don't have to solve the nonlinear problem all the time. So those are going to be the parameters we're going to estimate, and we're going to do it like an and surefire with a Bayesian likelihood approach. So here's a list of all the shocks we'd have in there.
Pretty fast, right?
Yeah, well, yes, sort of, yeah. Sort of, yeah. I mean, it's like for the full model estimation, it's like 3-4 hours maybe. You can do bits of it much faster, yeah.
But you don't have to read.
It's not a question of days, yeah. It's not a question of days. If you try to solve some stuff that enter into the steady state, yeah, then forget about it. Okay. Yeah, so that is calibrated to the Korean data, what the tax system looks like, tax and transfer system looks like. Yeah. So this sort of what we are calibrating towards the top 10. So one thing we noticed a little bit, and this we're still working on, is that different sources on inequality measures for Korea, like World Bank, Piketty, and other databases, that actually don't quite give you the same number. So we're trying to sort that out to figure out where we should calibrate that. Here, we're taking the top 10 wealth share, 57% from the WID, so the Piketty database. Import share, 35%. And we're taking foreign liquid assets to output at 14%, and the illiquid minus 17%. And then, actually, what we assume as well is that of the illiquid debt, we allow for some currency matching there. So 60% of that is going to be in won. The other 40% in dollars. Right. And so then we estimate things. Yeah.
One quick question. So those parameters are specific to Korea?
Yes, so these are specific to Korea, yeah. So the income processes and tax system and so on, yeah. So one thing that's important in these models here is that if you put yourself in the shoes of a household living in this model here, they don't care about the stuff we care about. The idiosyncratic risk is much, much more important than all the aggregate stuff, yeah. That's the thing you always get when you calibrate these models, yeah. But the aggregate stuff matters for how they can insure themselves against the idiosyncratic risk. So that's a key thing that's going on in here, yeah.
Morten, can I ask
yeah.
Before you do this estimation?
Yeah.
Before you do the estimation, I'm wondering, do you have any information, or maybe it's not even possible to do this, but using some kind of projection to figure out whether, let me take as an example.
Yeah.
A U.S. It's very fashionable now to calculate U.S. monetary policy shocks.
Yes.
And then see how, okay. So is it possible to do these wealth shares in the data appear to move with a U.S. monetary policy shock? And then ask, does the model behave in the same way? Yeah,
so I think that's a great question. That's the other thing we are working on at the moment. So we were thinking of doing the following. So take a group of countries with some foreign asset structure, another set of countries with another foreign asset structure, and then estimate the impact of US monetary policy shock there, allowing for the fact that this moves not only liquid returns, but also illiquid returns and export demand. So that was what the way we were imagining doing this.
Well, yeah, you would also estimate the response of the liquid and the illiquid.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of one thing we think we should put in there to see if we do see something there and how that corresponds. Yeah, because that turns out that's a really key thing for how things are transmitted. Yeah, how these different things is it sort of the illiquid return that important, or is the liquid, or is it the export demand? Yeah.
Well, it'd also be interesting to know what is it that you can get that you can't get with the how essential is it to do Hank versus
Yeah.
or tank?
Yeah, that's
Representative
well.
or tank.
I don't like. I'm not a huge fan of tank, but because I think it's just like a bit of a silly version of the Hank.
Yeah.
But Hank and rank, yeah, I think it's a nice one. So I'll sort of we estimate both of those now. So I'm going to show you how this matters for the parameter estimate. So that's what is coming now, yeah. So let me show you, yeah, so these are the parameter estimates we get out of the Bayesian estimator. The priors and the posteriors, Hank versus rank. And so the first parameters, this is capacity utilization adjustment cost, capital adjustment cost. This is slope of Phillips curve, price Phillips curve, slope of weight Phillips curve. These are parameters in monetary policy rule, in the spending rule. If you look through this, they're actually pretty similar, apart from adjustment costs are lower in Hank than in rank, because in Hank there are already adjustment costs through illiquid capital.
Is there a, are you going to show us the priors and posteriors picture?
No, so you know the whole distribution? No.
What I mean is,
yeah,
just the marginal distribution.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to show you more than this.
Do you see, does the data informative about these things?
Yeah, so the data does tend to be quite informative. Yeah, but I should show those. Yeah, I agree. So here are other ones. So the foreign elasticity. So eta open, that's elasticity in the Armington aggregator, and we always find that to be smaller than 1. Which I find interesting, because there's been a lot of discussion in the standard small open economy literature about whether that elasticity is bigger or smaller than 1. That matters a lot for risk sharing and other stuff. We always find that to be smaller than 1, and actually be pretty precisely estimated too. Yeah. Right. Okay. So these are just other. These are all parameters we estimate, yeah. But if you look through them, yeah, you tend to see that they are pretty similar between Hank and rank. So they're not too different apart from the adjustment cost there. So let me show you a little bit what happens in this model here. So here I'm feeding in, so this is like a hike in the US nominal interest rate. How does that impact on Korea here? Okay, so the US bond rate, yeah.
Do you allow the hike in the interest rate to slow the US economy and reduce, do you allow the hike in the US interest rate to slow the US economy and thereby slow the demand for exports from?
No, so yeah, that
it's like some pure.
Yeah, so here, no, that's a very good question. Yeah, so when we estimate this, yeah, we are assuming that the shocks are orthogonal when we're estimating.
Yeah.
But we could, which I think is fine, maybe. But what you could do in a second step is then do exactly what you said. So now let me look at the US monetary policy shock and see how it moves all of these things at the same time, and let me feed that in.
Yeah, you could put that in,
Yeah, so that we haven't done at this point, but that's exactly where we're going,
Yeah, you could do that.
That's exactly where we're going. So here, if you look at that, so the US monetary policy shock here in isolation, that okay, so that leads to an exchange rate depreciation.
How big the shock is?
Yeah, so this here is.
Is it the 19 basis? Is that 19?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So the U.S. monetary policy shock is 19 basis. It's 20 basis. Okay. And then you get a.
Then we get a drop in Korean output, investment. You get exchange rate depreciation. You get a spur of inflation, and you get a drop in consumption.
Now, that spurt in inflation is because you left out the.
You could, if that was in a monetary policy rule, or that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But.
I mean, that comes from the exchange rate. So that's.
Yeah, and also, I mean, FX intervention. could have, might have.
Yeah, so here these guys, so if you think about here Korea, like so they hold these foreign assets, and now basically they get a capital gain on that day, yeah.
No, but they have a lot of assets, right?
Yeah.
Now the problem is a lot of countries claim they don't go into the exchange market, whereas when you question them more closely, you find out actually they're in the exchange market all the time. So I don't know what you're fairly surely they don't go in, because that can have a huge effect on that. It can eliminate the pass-through basically by eliminating the exchange.
Some of those assets are
so,
not moved. It's not that they move them continuously.
Yeah, I mean, so I think in principle we should be able, if they were doing that, we should be able to estimate something like that. So we could just change the monetary policy rule and allow for it. Yeah.
Response would tell you something.
Yeah, that's right.
You could ask, you could do this shock.
Yeah.
And ask how does inflation respond and all this, even how reserves respond.
Yeah, yeah.
Here's a basic question. In a Mundell-Fleming model, this is the opposite from what you see. You have U.S. raises interest rates, currency depreciates, expenditure switching, huge boom.
No, it depends.
No. Well, yes. So in this environment here, I can think of a couple of things that could be doing this. One would be investment itself. There's a portfolio type effect on investment. The foreign returns are now higher, and Koreans may want to kind of abandon some plans for investment. So that could be one possibility. And other possibilities are something, because I think this is something that was emphasized by Matt wrongly. There's something about the impact on the distribution. The people who it's something about the heterogeneity, the Hank aspect, that accounts for the contractionary depreciation.
Yes, so, so I'll show you this picture here. So, this is confusing picture, but I'm showing here, I'm decomposing the consumption response here. What is driving that? So what I have in red, what I have in black is the total consumption response to this foreign or to the U.S. monetary policy shock. That's in black. And you can see like the thing that's dominating on that is the bond real rate. That's the main reason why consumption falls. But you can see some of those other effects. So you do see. So this is the export demand. That's hiking up the real wage, and that is actually stimulating consumption. So you do have that effect going that way, yeah. But it's not it just gets dominated by this one here. Then there's a capital return thing here, the other thing you mentioned, that's holding down. That's holding down consumption here. So, but the dominating thing comes through the real rate here. Now, let me do the other one, so the illiquid. So this is like the U.S. stock market gets stronger. How is that going to affect Korea here? And you can see that has a large impact on output, investment, consumption, etc. in Korea. So what's going on here? So the story here is that U.S. stock market goes up, and now there are these investment funds around. They start selling off the Korean assets because you must match the U.S. stock market in returns. So that increased the cost of capital in Korea. That leads to a huge decline in investment. Consumption, actually, the guys who are sort of subject to this are the rich guys. They're not so much affected by this, but there is this large impact through investment and through output here. And if you look at what is driving here, what is driving the large consumption response, or the consumption response here, that is through the capital returns now, and the weight is negative here. So this is negative transmission of the U.S. Stock market returns to the Korean economy. So now, going back to also what you were saying and where we were coming from, it's really a question about when U.S. monetary policy moves, what is moving more is sort of this liquid returns, where actually Korea is sort of insured because they hold US currency, or is it the stock market? Or maybe it's, it comes through the export demand. So this is what happens. So if there's improvement in export demand coming from the US, that stimulates the Korean economy here. So that stimulates output investment, etc., just because of the stimulation of export demand. And so here, if you do the decomposition of what is driving consumption, it really comes through wages. When US demand for Korean goods goes up, you want to buy more Korean cars, that stimulates wages in Korea. But now if you think about that, then actually this has large implications for what potentially might be driving not only sort of the aggregates in Korea now through this illiquid, or the export demand, but also potentially for inequality. So here I'm looking at the capital returns and the bond returns, how they impact on Gini consumption, top 10 income wealth shares, top 10 wealth, etc. And maybe if you just look at consumption here, you can see that actually in the short run, when world capital returns go up, that lowers the Gini consumption because these are owned by the rich guys. Then as the Korean economy, they respond to this, the return on the illiquid stuff goes up and then now starts increasing inequality. Well, so when the world bond returns go up, that depresses wages in Korea, and so that gives her higher inequality through consumption.
Yeah, that's a juicy thing to motivate projection method.
That's right, yeah. So that would be nice to match up somehow with that, yeah. I agree, yeah. So maybe I'll just do one last thing, is that like if you feed through the time series, and then let me just do that. I'll see that. So here Gini coefficient on consumption. So that's the black line it's moving around. It's there, and if you see what has held sort of down inequality in Korea. So it turns out that one thing here is sort of export demand has been holding down inequality in Korea through the wage effects. So that's what this model ends up saying here. Okay, so let me stop there. So there's still work to be done on this here, especially adding this kind of empirics that Larry also was talking about. That was exactly the same as we were thinking. That would be nice to add to it. Also here, actually to get this more important potentially income effects, we need a kink in the budget constraint here. So we need to allow for some consumer debt with a kink in the budget constraint. So we're putting that in. And we are working on trying to get better microdata that we add to the estimation. Yeah, that's what we're doing. And then I'll stop with one thing, but yesterday when we were sitting in here, Bank of England, they hiked the nominal interest rate yesterday. And I immediately got a message from my bank saying, oh, good news, the return on your savings has gone up now. Yeah. But then I was checking the newspapers this morning. This is what I saw in the newspapers. Wrong. How can we trust the Bank of England when its predictions on recession, unemployment, inflation have so far been wrong? So that's the English take on monetary policy. Yeah, I thought it was kind of... yeah.
The kink doesn't, I mean, a kink normally is a scary thing when you have a model.
No, here you can do, so so Ralph and I have another paper, it's all about the kink, yeah. So kink here, so if the kink moves around over time, that is kind of a powerful mechanism in these models. Yeah. And how the kink would move around is like if you have changes in the return on savings versus the price of consumer debt, that moves the kink, and that sort of...
and you can handle that quickly.
Yes, we can handle that pretty quickly. Yeah, that's not hard. Yeah. It's hard to model more micro level why the kink moves, but the fact that the kink moves is not hard. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Morten.